Great.
Welcome back. I'm sharing some research that I've been doing on adults on the autism spectrum. Pardon the low tech today. The person who helped me with my YouTube content and my audio content is also a missionary. And so he is busy doing many things with his primary ministry. So I'm doing this on my own today. So that's why you're seeing a little bit low tech difference in quality today. But what I want to share with you is coming from an article that I recently had published called Exploring a Later in Life Diagnosis and Its Impact on Marital Satisfaction in the Lost Generation of Autistic Adults. And this is an exploratory, phenomenological qualitative study. So in the notes, you will have access where you can look at the entire research, but I really just want to kind of provide a little bit of differences. Earlier in a YouTube, I talked about the difference in social communication styles and the double empathy problem that can arise in neurodiverse relationships and marriages. So what I want to kind of talk about today really is coming from some of the charts and tables, data that I gathered from my study. So let me tell you kind of how the study began. First, when something's exploratory, that means you're looking into something that there is a gap in the literature. So specifically, what I wanted to study was not only just neurodiverse couples, but neurodiverse Christian couples. Now, originally, what I had hoped to do in my study was to have enough people who were people of faith and people who were not, who did not have a faith background to look at the differences between the two populations. However, there was not enough people who signed up for the survey to make that comparison. I think there was around 20 to 25 individuals who said that they were atheist, agnostic, or spiritual, but not specifically a faith tradition. Then it was somewhere between 85 and 90%, though, who answered who did say they belong to a Christian faith. So really the focus began to look at what's going on in neurodiverse Christian marriages. So it started with a survey that went out internationally. It's also fair to say that because it was in English, it was only available to English speakers. So primary, the results are from North America, specifically the United States and Canada. And then there were people who took it in Europe and then New Zealand and Australia. So that's primarily where the information came from. Also, I hope to have much more diversity from those who filled out the survey, but it turned out to be at least 85% white Caucasian individuals and not a lot of diversity of people of color and different cultural backgrounds. So I wanted to kind of give you that heads up. So while it was out there and available, those who finished the survey, it was about a 34, 35 question survey. So I used a survey to kind of see what different people had experienced. And so there was over 300 individuals who filled out this survey. Then from that survey became the next level of study, which is called phenomenological, which is when you do some qualitative interviews and you go deeper with a few participants to get more information. So today I'm really focusing a little bit more from the perspective of the person who's on the spectrum or neurodivergent. So the first thing that I found, so having already explained the double empathy and communication issues, I want to go through some of the answers that came from the neurodivergent population. I might have shared some of this on a previous YouTube, but if this is your first time watching, the results came up. I asked at what is the age that the person had a diagnosis or identification on the autism spectrum. So the highest percentage was between 40 and 49, age 40 to 49. That was 47 of the 108 people. So from the over 300 individuals that filled out the survey, 108 were people who identified on the spectrum. The majority of those were male. There was probably 8 to 10 females that participated. So this is 108 individuals on the spectrum. So 47 out of 108 put about 42% being diagnosed between the ages of 40 and 49. So if you look at though, it was 40 to 49, then 30 to 39, 60 to 69, 50 to 59. So if you take all of those from ranging from age 30 to almost 70, that was 86% of the population. Right, so this tells us that there is still an issue with early identification and processing. And so when someone is, at least in the Christian world, when someone's kind of met and already in their 30s, more than likely they're in a significant relationship or marriage. So that's kind of the problem that I wanted to research and look at a little bit more, because it's not just being a neurodiverse couple that brings some challenges and complexities, it's the not knowing. It's not thinking this is what I have in my relationship, and then we've got all these complex challenges and we just can't figure it out. And then here's like years, possibly decades later, we just find out what is the one of the issues or complexities that we've been experiencing as a couple. So the second thing, another thing that I'd asked him is, what were other diagnoses that were given prior to being identified on the autism spectrum? So a little over half the population had received no other diagnoses, but the ones that were given prior: depressive disorders, ADD, ADHD. And so it's important to note that before the DSM-5, which came out in about 2013, prior DSMs would not allow a person to have a diagnosis in ADHD and autism. So it's not until the DSM-5 that they could be co-occurring. Before, they had to be ruled out, one or the other. So if someone maybe had an ADHD diagnosis prior to 2013, and there are other complexities that doesn't seem to be explained by ADHD alone, then perhaps there's some other neurodivergencies in there too, such as the autism spectrum. Anxiety disorders, from OCD to generalized anxiety, trauma-related diagnoses, social phobias, social anxieties, learning disorders and learning challenges. Very few, but some had personality disorders. Some were identified as sensory integration, and some as conduct disorder. Those were very small. So another thing, I have talked about this a little bit in another YouTube, but it bears repeating. What were the reasons when someone went to get an identification, or if a couple went to counseling? What were some of the reasons that the clinician, who was not autism trained or aware, what were some of the quips or the things that they said? We would call these myths, or not understanding the complexities of the autism spectrum. What did they say were the reasons why this person could not possibly be on the autism spectrum? They have a friend and appear social. They're too successful at work. They are too smart or too intelligent. So again, there's still this conflation of intellect and autism, which brings a negative stigma. They or you maintain eye contact too well. So one of the huge things that I try to tell clinicians when they are diagnosing or assessing people on the spectrum is to ask them if they grew up maybe in a homeschool culture or a Christian culture, or maybe a culture that demands eye contact. So there are certain cultures, specifically the Christian culture, where eye contact is a really big deal. It's a sign of respect. And so from an early age, this might have been kind of drilled into children's and teens' heads that you will make eye contact. But that doesn't mean that the person enjoys or uses eye contact effectively. So this eye contact issue can be a huge issue in getting a proper diagnosis. It's also important to note that in the DSM-5, it does not state that a person's eye contact is a definitive for or on the spectrum. So it does say different body language and different uses of eye contact, but it does not specifically say if someone does not maintain eye contact, or if someone has learned how to use eye contact, then that is a disqualifier. So that's really important to know. Also, when I'm interviewing individuals and when we're doing some type of assessment, and if I'm seeing pretty good eye contact, I might simply ask the question, what does it feel like when you give eye contact? Have you ever been given any kind of feedback about your eye contact? Or when you're making eye contact with someone in an emotional type of situation, how do you process that? And usually the answer, you've got to ask that question, because simply what you're observing might not give you that information. A reason was given, some stereotypical reason, you're too athletic. Everybody on the spectrum is just has problems with clumsiness or motor coordination. And that's not true. There are athletes that are on the spectrum. The professional counselor did not believe in labels. This is a huge pet peeve and frustration with some of my fellow Christian counselors. We just don't do labels. Everyone is on the spectrum. Again, while that sounds really nice from your perspective, it actually is very dismissive. And so it means that you're not really looking into all the challenges and complexities of what's happening in the relationship. This person's too well liked. Their interest and passion is too normal. Again, this insinuates that the interest the person has or the passion that they have must be atypical, must be weird, must be not useful. When Dr. Temple Grandin and many others who are on the spectrum and advocates would say, if a person gets employed in an area of passionate interest, you're going to do very well. So that passionate interest doesn't have to be a negative thing or a weird or quirky thing. What we're looking at when it becomes the diagnostic criteria is, what is the moderation there? Has it taken over work life or marriage life work balance? Does the person prefer to do this over relationships with other people? Now, if a person is single and celibate, that's perfectly fine. And if that's how they want to spend their time in their interest, that's great. It's more problematic when you're in a marital relationship where there are expectation of shared duties and responsibilities and relational contact. Let's see, another one, because the person got married, they couldn't be autistic because autistic people prefer to be alone. That's also another huge myth. Just at the center of who we are as humans, we want to belong and we want to be in community. Now that might translate differently from a neurotypical to a neurodivergent individual, but it doesn't mean that someone wants to be alone and not to be part of belonging or community. In some situations, people even gave a physical feature. You're attractive, you're too tall, you're too short, something crazy like that. So I don't even know where those crazy stereotypes came from, but those are the ones that came up in the top. Okay, so what's really important to note, and you can see the differences in the graph when you look at their actual research, but looking at the difference between the neurotypical and the neurodivergent on being happily married to being very dissatisfied. So if you look at those results, you will see that the neurodivergent person in general tends to rate being more happily married, satisfied, satisfied more than dissatisfied. I'm fine, but my spouse isn't fine. And what you saw is a higher rate for the person who is neurotypical, rating discontent, dissatisfied, very dissatisfied, or filing for divorce. And part of it is going to be, again, I believe it comes from a missed or undiagnosis, not being diagnosed, and then all of these years that happen between the people, the communication, unintentional abuse, neglect, trauma that occurs in the relationship, and then maybe having marriage counseling or reading books and it didn't help, it made it worse, and then like this hopelessness that kind of comes in. So those things, the complexity, it's not the neurodiversity just in and of itself in the marriage. It is the not knowing and not having the proper tools and skills for the couple to work with each other. Now, one of the reasons I laid all that groundwork is I wanted to talk about what does satisfaction or contentment look like from the person who's on the spectrum, because this is, again, where there's differences in what connection and intimacy mean. So when I did the interviews, the qualitative interviews with individuals, male and female, who identified on the spectrum, these were the answers that were given on what brought satisfaction or contentment to them, because I did not use a satisfaction or content measure, because I allowed people to define for themselves what is satisfaction and what is being content. So from the neurodivergent perspective, the answers were: number one, when there is no conflict. And conflict was really defined as any kind of disagreement. So where we want to go to dinner tonight could rank enough as conflict for those who are on the spectrum. So number one, I feel satisfied or content when there is no conflict or disagreement. Number two, when we are doing a shared activity of my choice that I enjoy. All right, so again, if it's in that individual's preferred interest or topic and the spouse or family is engaged in that topic with them, that would be considered contentment or satisfaction for that individual. When there is not a demand or any pressure or ask on me. Okay, so this is going to be quite difficult in a marriage relationship because there are a lot of responsibilities and ask and time pressures that simply come in being a marriage and then being part of a larger family system. So you can see this is going to be a competing need to not have a demand, a pressure, or an ask placed on them. When my spouse appreciates me or recognizes the positives that I contribute, I think that for neurotypicals or neurodiverse individuals, being appreciated and affirmed is something that would be for intimacy and connection. But where sometimes in my work with couples is when I'm talking to specifically a man on the spectrum, any form of coaching or ask for help is seen as criticism. And so therefore, the need for appreciation seems to be 8 to 1. Like if you're going to tell me one thing that I didn't do correctly, I need 7 to 8 things that I do positive. And I don't know that that necessarily is sustainable because that's usually not reciprocated. I'm being respected or accepted as an individual and accepted for my differences. So a lot of things came up in a lot of pain, especially if the neurotypical spouse blames autism or Asperger's or the neurodivergence for the sole reason of the marriage problems and doesn't want to take any form of contribution or responsibility to the cycle that the couple's given in. That is a huge pain point for those on the spectrum. Doing activities we both enjoy, having fun together. So again, it's kind of based in an activity kind of setting that we're doing something. When we are acting as a team, when they encourage me to do new things and pursue my passions and interests. And then this last one came up more from neurodivergent males than females. But the men said when we are having sex or having sex more regularly, or there is more physical touch. Now, one of the females on the spectrum said that this was also true for her. That was not necessarily true for the other women who took this survey or participated. All right, so themes of dissatisfaction and discontent, again, from the person on the spectrum. These are things that cause dissatisfaction, why they chose, if they chose they were dissatisfied or discontent. Feeling that the autism Asperger's is blamed for all of our marriage problems, noted primarily in those who were mixed neurology relationships. There were a few individuals who were in a double neurodivergent relationship. Feeling criticized, being told that I'm not enough, that I'll never meet this person's needs or expectations. When I don't have enough alone time to decompress and engage in my interest. So there is definitely a need for the passionate interest. We need that to be, though, in moderation. In one of the studies that I was working on, looking at the orbital prefrontal cortex of the brain, the researchers said that this orbital prefrontal cortex, which is really important for relationship, joy building, building social relational connection, the more a person spends in isolation or doing one's own interest or passion is actually kind of building up kind of to the detriment, the left side of the brain, the logical brain, the fact side of the brain. And it's kind of like if you go to the gym and you're only doing a workout on the right side of your body, then the left side of your body is not going to look too great. It's not going to be able to function the same unless you're doing equal work. And so too much alone time, too much decompression, too much time in your own interest without being relational is going to create more relational problems. But again, these are themes that came from individuals who are on the spectrum. When there's constant conflict, heightened emotion in the home environment, being told repetitively that my spouse is not happy or healthy and I'm the cause, lack of physical affection, touch, our sex life can be lacking or non-existent. This was by half of the men who participated in the interviews. When I feel my spouse just simply wants me to be neurotypical or continually compares our marriage to a neurotypical marriage. My spouse will regularly say that she regrets marrying me or my spouse threatens divorce. So living in any situation, if there is a constant threat of separation and divorce, that's going to create fear and a lot of anxiety. We are in in-home separation, living in separate rooms, which I do not want. And so again, this kind of becomes an issue with competing needs. Many times, and specifically neurodiverse Christian marriages, which is what I typically work in, if there comes a time where for the wife, she has been, kind of giving and bringing joy and over functioning, where she just gets drained. And it feels like, there's not anything happening for me in the marriage. And it feels like my specifically male AS partner is getting everything that they want. Being in the same bedroom can become very emotionally painful. So sometimes an accommodation or a short-term fix is to live in separate rooms. Well, for the neurodivergent individuals, sometimes that's all they need. It's just sharing a room. We have dinner together. We have these occasional activities together. That means connection and intimacy to me. So when the neurotypical spouse wants to live in a separate room because of what's going on specifically in her, if she's neurotypical, that creates distress for the neurodivergent spouse. Having children with autism or special needs, there are added demands, challenges, and cost of their needs. Then it was noted that participants said they did not regret having children or adopting children with needs, but because they did not know about their own autism, they did not know about their own challenges, they feel that this created another complexity and pressure in the marriage and family that they simply were not aware on. So that was very important. That was noted, that the individuals do not regret their children, do not regret adopting children. They simply just did not know. And some having 5, 6, 7 children, or adopting multiple children, or having multiple children that ended up with needs, they just simply didn't know they had their own needs that would be part of the equation. So finally, this is the adults' advice from adults on the spectrum, and this is what they wanted to speak to their neurotypical partners. The first one was, please slow down. Remember, we have different processing. Give us time to think and respond. That responding in the moment is sometimes far too difficult. Having a pause or slowing down the communication, especially if emotions are involved, was an ask or a recommendation. The second one is alter your expectations. And these are some of the things that were said. I will never be in T. Please stop comparing our marriages to other neurotypical marriages. I will never give you a Hallmark or Disney movie marriage. Can you be satisfied with me? If I do the work that I can do, can you be satisfied? We love you, or I love you, but I don't always know how to show it. I want to be emotionally supportive to you and connect with you, but I'm struggling with the how. When I'm dysregulated, please give me time to regulate. So this is a tricky one. So I think it is important for either partner, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, and there's become dysregulation, either a shutdown or a meltdown. There needs to be time and space to regulate. So many times couples think we got to solve this in the next hour or two. And so sometimes the neurodivergent person might then flee or escape and not want to come back. And if you listen to our podcast with Dr. Gill, that's going to create an abandonment or rejection wound. So we have to figure out the way to pause it, slow it down. If there is dysregulation, take the break, but have the time to come back and be able to talk through it in a way to bring some kind of resolve. It is the lack of resolve and the lack of getting things accomplished that increases the pain for the neurotypical individual. If you have a need or concern, please start with a gentle startup and a soft approach. Please give me time. Let's communicate one topic or need at a time. So sometimes the neurotypical maybe it's been a day or a week because maybe you haven't talked in a while, and kind of sometimes coming at your neurodivergent partner with a lot of things is going to flood them and overwhelm them. So an ask from the neurodivergent spouse is one need, one concern at a time, and please bring it with a gentle startup and soft approach. Also, I need appreciation and affirmation when I've done something well. I feel like I hear more about my failings, my mistakes, and this can be demoralizing, hurtful, discouraging, depression. Please encourage me in my strengths. Remind me and yourself what I bring to the marriage or the family. And please do not wrong spot, but learn to right spot. Everything feels all or nothing, pass or fail. This was a comment made repeatedly, specifically by AS men, that I'm one mistake away from separation or divorce, and this is affecting my mental health. It also affects my motivation to want to do better or to try different things. And the last one, just because you're neurotypical does not mean I am by default incorrect in my perspective every time we interact. So that can be, again, part of that double empathy problem that we talked about in a previous YouTube. So again, if you want to find and you want to see the entire research, then go down to the show notes. There will be a link there if you want to read the entire article. Thank you for joining me today.